Do you close your eyes every night, already lying in bed, and whisper a few prayers before falling asleep? Do you think that's enough to keep your soul in true communion with God? Saint Teresa of Jesus, Doctor of the Church and incomparable Master of interior life, warns us of a danger that many don't perceive, transforming prayer into a distracted, mechanical, and even irreverent act. According to her, the posture of your body directly reflects the disposition of your soul. And a soul that truly seeks the divine presence must be vigilant, awake, and reverent before the Creator. Perhaps you've never thought of it this way, but there's an abysmal difference between murmuring devout words while your body is already preparing for sleep and presenting yourself before God with the full attention of one who knows they stand before the King of Kings. Saint Teresa experienced both forms of prayer and can testify that the way you position yourself physically before the Most Holy determines the depth of the spiritual encounter you'll have. When you pray lying down, you're unconsciously telling your spirit that this moment can be relaxed, casual, without the solemnity that an encounter with the divine deserves. The Saint of Avila wrote with penetrating clarity, "Prayer is nothing else than an intimate conversation between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with Him who we know loves us." Notice these words carefully. Being alone implies an intimate encounter, but also a respectful one, like when you receive someone very important in your home. You wouldn't receive a king lying in your bed, would you? Then why present yourself this way before the King of Kings? Saint Teresa understood that external reverence awakens internal reverence, and that the posture of the body educates the soul for true adoration. At this moment, you might be asking yourself, but doesn't God see the heart? Does the position of the body really matter that much? Saint Teresa's answer would be clear and direct. Of course God sees the heart, but that's exactly why posture matters. When you kneel, when you sit upright, when you keep your eyes open and your mind alert, you're educating your heart to recognize divine greatness. You're creating a sacred space not only around you, but within yourself. Prayer lying down can easily slide into drowsiness, distraction, lukewarmness, and lukewarmness in prayer is one of the greatest dangers a soul can face. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more teachings and advice from Saint Teresa. Have you noticed how easy it is for the mind to scatter when the body is too relaxed? Saint Teresa of Jesus observed in her own experience that there's a mysterious but real connection between physical posture and spiritual elevation. She discovered that when she allowed herself to pray in positions that invited sleep or distraction, her soul would inevitably follow the body's lead toward lethargy. It wasn't that God stopped listening to her prayers, but rather that she stopped truly listening to God. In her masterwork, The Way of Perfection, Saint Teresa writes with the authority of someone who learned through trial and suffering, "It is very important for those who practice prayer to begin with a firm determination not to stop until they reach the water, no matter what happens, no matter what people say, no matter how hard the work becomes, no matter whether they die on the way." But how can you maintain this firm determination if your very posture suggests surrender to comfort rather than surrender to God? How can your soul remain vigilant if your body signals that it's time to rest? You might think this is a minor detail, something that doesn't really affect the essence of prayer. But Saint Teresa would gently but firmly disagree. She understood that we are not pure spirits. We are souls united to bodies, and this union is so intimate that one affects the other constantly. When you consistently pray lying down, you're training your soul to associate prayer with rest, relaxation, and eventually spiritual drowsiness. The neural pathways in your brain begin to connect prayer time with sleep time, making it increasingly difficult to achieve the alertness and attention that true prayer requires. Think about the great saints throughout history. Did any of them develop their profound intimacy with God while lying comfortably in bed? Saint Teresa herself spent hours kneeling in her cell, sometimes in physical discomfort, but always with her soul alert and her heart burning with love for Christ. She knew that the small sacrifice of maintaining a reverent posture was actually a gift she offered to God, a way of saying, "This time is yours, Lord, and I present myself to you with all the respect and attention you deserve." What message does your posture send to the Divine Majesty? The darkness of the cell at the Incarnation Convent was broken only by the flickering light of a small candle. Saint Teresa knelt on the cold stone floor, her back straight, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the crucifix before her. She had been there for hours, not because she felt like it, but because she had learned that true prayer requires discipline, not just of the heart, but of the entire being. Her knees ached, her back was stiff, but her soul was more alert and receptive to God's voice than it had ever been when she prayed in comfort. You see, Saint Teresa discovered something that modern comfort-seeking spirituality often misses. The body is not separate from the soul, it's the soul's companion and teacher. When she forced her tired body to maintain a posture of reverence, something profound happened in her spirit. The physical act of kneeling reminded her of her proper relationship with God. She the creature, he the creator, she the beloved, he the beloved who deserves all honor. The discomfort itself became a prayer, a small offering that said, I love you more than I love my own comfort. But perhaps you're thinking, I don't feel anything special when I kneel to pray. My mind still wanders, my heart still feels cold sometimes. Saint Teresa would smile knowingly at your concern because she experienced the same struggles. The difference isn't in what you feel immediately, it's in what you're building over time. Each time you choose to kneel instead of lie down, each time you maintain alertness instead of succumbing to drowsiness, you're creating spiritual muscle memory. You're teaching your soul that this relationship with God is the most important thing in your life, worth your best effort and attention. There's profound wisdom in the Church's traditional practices that Saint Teresa embraced wholeheartedly. When the Church prescribes certain postures for prayer, kneeling during the consecration, standing for the gospel, bowing at sacred moments, it's not arbitrary tradition, it's accumulated wisdom about how the body and soul work together to create space for the sacred. Saint Teresa knew that when she knelt, she was joining her personal prayer to the prayer of the entire Church, positioning herself in the same reverent stance that countless saints had taken before her. What would happen to your prayer life if you decided, starting tonight, to honor God with the same intentional reverence that marked the saints? Call to action. If this message is touching your heart, write in the comments, Saint Teresa, teach me to pray with reverence and love. Subscribe to our channel and share this video with someone who needs to deepen their prayer life. The human heart is mysteriously complex, and Saint Teresa understood this better than most spiritual directors of her time. She recognized that we are not angels, pure spirits who can worship God with thought alone. We are embodied souls, and our bodies either help or hinder our spiritual progress. When you consistently choose to pray lying down, you're not just making a small accommodation to comfort. You're actually training your heart to approach God casually, without the awe and reverence that His infinite majesty deserves. Consider how you prepare for important meetings in your life. When you have a job interview, you dress carefully, arrive early, and maintain attentive posture throughout the conversation. When you meet someone you respect deeply, your body language naturally reflects that respect. You don't slouch, you don't close your eyes, you don't position yourself for relaxation. Saint Teresa asks you a piercing question. If earthly authorities and human relationships merit such careful attention to posture and presentation, how much more should your encounters with the King of Heaven reflect conscious reverence? In her letters to the nuns under her guidance, Saint Teresa frequently emphasized that prayer is a matter of love, not of thinking much. But she was quick to clarify that this love must engage the whole person, mind, heart, and body. When you love someone deeply, you naturally want to show them honor and respect in tangible ways. The lover doesn't approach the beloved carelessly or absent-mindedly. Every gesture, every word, every moment of attention becomes a gift offered with intention and care. You might protest, but God knows my heart. He knows I love Him even when I pray lying down. Saint Teresa would respond with gentle but firm correction. Yes, beloved soul, God knows your heart, but do you know your own heart? Do you understand how easily the human heart deceives itself? She learned through painful experience that what we call simplicity in prayer can often mask spiritual laziness. What we call informality with God can actually be presumption. The heart that truly loves seeks every opportunity to show that love through action, through sacrifice, through the gift of disciplined attention. There's a profound spiritual principle that Saint Teresa discovered through decades of prayer. The exterior shapes the interior more than we realize. When she observed her own prayer life carefully, she noticed that the nights when she prayed lying down, her mind wandered more easily to worldly concerns. Her prayers became routine recitations rather than heartfelt conversations. she found herself falling asleep mid-prayer, not because she was physically exhausted, but because her posture signaled to her entire being that this was rest time, not sacred time. But when she disciplined herself to kneel, to sit upright, to maintain physical alertness, something beautiful happened. Her mind became sharper, more focused on the divine mysteries. Her heart opened more readily to God's inspirations. Even when she didn't feel particularly devout at the beginning of prayer, the act of maintaining reverent posture gradually drew her soul into deeper recollection. She discovered that the body, rather than being an obstacle to prayer, could become prayer's greatest ally when properly directed. Saint Teresa wrote in her spiritual diary, "I have found that when I treat prayer as something casual, my soul begins to treat God as casual. But when I approach prayer with ceremony, with preparation, with the solemnity it deserves, my heart remembers who it is that I am addressing." This isn't mere psychology, it's profound spiritual wisdom. The act of kneeling reminds your soul of its proper relationship to the infinite. The discipline of staying awake reminds your heart that this conversation matters more than sleep, more than comfort, more than convenience. Think about your own experience honestly. When you pray lying down, how often do you fall asleep before finishing your prayers? How frequently does your mind drift to tomorrow's plans, today's problems, or simply dissolve into drowsiness? Now contrast that with moments when you've prayed in a church, kneeling before the Blessed Sacrament, or standing in reverent attention. Can you feel the difference in the quality of your attention, the depth of your recollection? Saint Teresa is calling you to bring that same intentional reverence into your daily prayer life, not as a burden, but as a gift you offer to the God who loves you infinitely. The mystics throughout church history understood something that modern spirituality often forgets. Transformation requires discipline, and discipline includes training the body to serve the soul's highest aspirations. Saint Teresa learned this not from books, but from the laboratory of her own prayer experience. She discovered that when she allowed her body to dictate the terms of her prayer, seeking comfort, avoiding discomfort, prioritizing convenience, her spiritual progress stagnated. But when she gently but firmly required her body to serve her soul's hunger for God, breakthrough came. You live in an age that often preaches that God wants you comfortable, that authentic spirituality should never feel difficult or demanding. But Saint Teresa, who experienced the heights of mystical union with Christ, would challenge this comfortable assumption. She knew that the path to deep intimacy with God requires the same kind of intentional effort that any meaningful relationship demands. You don't build a strong marriage by always choosing the easiest option, and you don't build a strong prayer life by always choosing the most comfortable position. Consider the profound symbolism embedded in the act of kneeling. When you kneel, you're acknowledging that God is God and you are not. You're positioning yourself as a creature before the Creator, a student before the teacher, a beloved before the lover who gave everything for you. This isn't merely symbolic, it's sacramental. The physical act carries spiritual reality and creates spiritual reality. Saint Teresa understood that the soul needs these concrete expressions of reverence to fully grasp the magnitude of the relationship it's entering. But here's what's beautiful about Saint Teresa's teaching. She's not calling you to grim, joyless discipline. She's inviting you into the freedom that comes from aligning your entire being, body and soul, with your deepest desire for God. When you choose reverent posture in prayer, you're not performing empty ritual. You're creating optimal conditions for the encounter your heart truly craves. You're removing the obstacles that prevent you from receiving the fullness of what God wants to give you in prayer. What might happen to your relationship with Christ if you began treating your daily prayer time with the same careful attention you give to your most important human relationships? Something extraordinary begins to happen when you consistently pray with reverent posture and alert attention. Saint Teresa discovered this transformation in her own life and witnessed it in the lives of countless souls she directed. The change doesn't happen overnight. Spiritual growth rarely does, but it happens surely and beautifully, like dawn gradually dispelling darkness. When you train your body to honor God in prayer, your soul begins to experience new depths of divine intimacy that were previously inaccessible. Saint Teresa wrote with the authority of lived experience, The soul that learns to approach God with proper reverence finds that God approaches that soul with greater intimacy. This isn't because God plays favorites or rewards external conformity, but because reverence creates the interior space necessary for deeper spiritual receptivity. When your mind is alert, your body upright, and your heart intentionally focused, you can perceive the subtle movements of grace that drowsy, distracted prayer simply cannot receive. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to have a deep conversation with someone while you're lying down with your eyes closed, half asleep. Even if the other person is speaking profound truths, your capacity to receive and respond is severely limited by your physical state. But when you're attentive, alert, and present, you can catch nuances of tone, read expressions, respond with understanding. The same dynamic operates in prayer. Saint Teresa learned that God is always speaking, always present, always offering grace. But our capacity to receive depends partly on how we present ourselves to receive. You might be surprised to discover how much your prayer experience changes when you commit to reverent posture for just 1 month. Saints who have walked this path before you report increased clarity in hearing God's voice, deeper peace during prayer, more vivid sense of Christ's presence, and stronger motivation to continue praying even when it feels difficult. This isn't magic. It's the natural fruit of treating prayer as the sacred encounter it truly is. Saint Teresa is calling you to this transformation, not as a harsh taskmaster, but as a loving guide who knows the joy that awaits you on the other side of discipline. The deeper you go in prayer, the more you understand why Saint Teresa was so insistent about reverent posture. She discovered that God desires to communicate with you not just through thoughts and feelings, but through your entire being. When your body is properly aligned in prayer, alert, reverent, receptive, it becomes a tuned instrument capable of receiving the subtle frequencies of divine communication. But when your body is careless, drowsy, or comfortable to the point of distraction, it's like trying to receive a delicate radio signal through a broken antenna. Saint Teresa experienced this reality in her own mystical life. Some of her most profound encounters with Christ occurred during long periods of kneeling prayer, when her body had moved beyond initial discomfort into a state of peaceful alertness. She learned that the body, rather than being an obstacle to spiritual experience, could become a gateway when properly prepared and positioned. The physical discipline created a sacred container for supernatural grace. But perhaps you're thinking, I'm not a mystic like Saint Teresa. I don't expect extraordinary spiritual experiences. Here's what the saint would tell you. Every sincere soul is called to mystical union with God, though it may not look like ecstasies and visions. Your mystical life might be the deep peace that comes during silent prayer, the sudden insight that solves a problem you've been carrying, the sense of God's love that wells up in your heart unexpectedly. These graces are just as real and just as supernatural as the more dramatic experiences, but they require the same receptive conditions to be fully received. The practice of reverent prayer posture becomes a form of ongoing consecration. Each time you choose to kneel rather than lie down, to stay alert rather than drift into drowsiness, you're offering your body as a living sacrifice of praise. Saint Teresa understood that this small, repeated offering gradually transforms not just your prayer time, but your entire relationship with God. You begin to live with greater awareness of His presence throughout the day. You develop spiritual sensitivity that allows you to recognize His hand in daily events. You cultivate the interior silence necessary for deeper contemplation. What started as a simple change in physical position becomes a revolution in spiritual living. As your practice of reverent prayer matures, you begin to understand why the great saints throughout history were so particular about their prayer postures. Saint Teresa learned that there's a mysterious reciprocity between how we honor God and how deeply we're able to receive His grace. This isn't because God is petty or demanding, but because reverence creates the interior conditions necessary for authentic spiritual transformation. When you consistently approach prayer with the respect due to divine majesty, your soul develops the capacity for increasingly intimate union with Christ. The beauty of this spiritual principle is that it applies regardless of your current level of holiness or spiritual maturity. Whether you're just beginning your journey with God or you've been praying for decades, whether you feel close to Christ or you're struggling through spiritual dryness, the practice of reverent posture can deepen your experience. Saint Teresa discovered that even in periods when she felt nothing in prayer, when God seemed distant and her heart felt cold. Maintaining proper posture helped her persevere until warmth returned. You see, reverent prayer posture becomes a form of faith in action. When you kneel, even though you don't feel particularly devout. When you stay alert, even though your heart seems unmoved. When you maintain respectful attention, even though distractions multiply. You're making a profound act of faith. You're declaring through your body what your mind believes, that God is present, that He deserves honor, that this relationship matters more than your momentary feelings or comfort. Saint Teresa learned that this embodied faith often awakens the heart when pure intellectual effort fails. The transformation doesn't stop with your prayer life. Saint Teresa observed that those who learned to pray with proper reverence began to carry themselves differently throughout the day. They developed a more vivid sense of God's presence in all activities. They found it easier to remember divine truths in moments of temptation or trial. They became more sensitive to the needs of others, more patient with difficulties, more joyful in their service. The reverence cultivated in prayer gradually infused their entire approach to life. This is the fruit Saint Teresa promises to those who take seriously the call to honor God with their whole being, body and soul united in worship. Now you stand at a crossroads that will shape not just your prayer life, but your entire spiritual destiny. Saint Teresa of Jesus, Doctor of the Church and Master of the Interior Life, has placed before you a choice that seems small but carries eternal significance. Will you continue to approach the King of Heaven casually, comfortably, with the same posture you use for sleep? Or will you embrace the transformation that comes from offering God the reverence that His infinite majesty deserves? The path Saint Teresa invites you to walk is not a burden but a liberation. When you choose to pray with alert attention, reverent posture, and disciplined focus, you're not limiting your freedom. You're creating the conditions for the deepest freedom possible, the freedom of intimate union with God. The small sacrifice of comfort becomes the gateway to consolations that the world cannot give. The momentary discipline of proper posture opens the door to spiritual experiences that casual prayer can never access. But this choice must be made anew each day, each time you approach prayer. The spiritual life is built through countless small decisions, each one either drawing you closer to or further from the divine intimacy your heart craves. Saint Teresa learned that the soul that perseveres in reverent prayer, even through periods of dryness and difficulty, will eventually discover treasures hidden in the depths of God's love. The body that is trained to serve the soul's highest aspirations becomes not a prison, but a temple, not an obstacle, but an instrument of grace. As you close this teaching, carry with you Saint Teresa's most essential insight. God is not impressed by your words, but by your love, and love always seeks to honor the beloved. The way you position yourself in prayer speaks a language that goes deeper than speech, expressing either reverence or casualness, attention or distraction, love or lukewarmness. Choose reverence, choose attention, choose the posture of love. Let your body become your soul's teacher in the art of worship, and discover the transformation that awaits those who dare to pray as if they truly believe that the Creator of the universe is listening, present, and worthy of their very best offering. This is Saint Teresa's gift to you, not another rule to follow, but an invitation